I'm Joshua Sparrow at the Brazelton Touchpoint Center, and this is Learning to Listen, Conversations for Change. To find out more about the Brazelton Touchpoint Center and Learning to Listen, just go to brazeltontouchpoints.org and click on the Offerings tab or the Webinars tab. Today, we will be visiting with Sesame Workshop's Maria del Rocio Galarza, Vice President of U.S. Social Impact, and Tara Wright, Senior Manager of Content Design, for a conversation about how Sesame Workshop supports children and families as they arrive with trauma and loss and strengths and resilience from around the globe to resettle in the United States. We are very grateful to have Sesame Workshop back with us again today, and you will soon see why as we learn with Tara and Rocio about Sesame's resilience building, strengths celebrating resources. But first, a bit of information about today's Learning to Listen episode. Over 2,000 people have registered for today's webinar. It's so great to have you with us. So tell us who you are and where you're from and what you do in the chat, and welcome. Today, our wonderful interpreter, Maria Jose Gutierrez, joining us all the way from Bogota, Colombia, will be simultaneously translating our webinar in Spanish. We'll try to remember to speak slowly for you, Maria Jose, and thank you so much. To access the translation, click on the interpretation icon in your Zoom controls. Then select Spanish. To mute the English in the background, select Mute Original Audio. La conversación de hoy será en español e inglés. En los controles de su reunión, haga clic en Interpretación. Haga clic en el idioma que le gustaría escuchar para escuchar solo español. Haga clic en Silenciar audio original. We are also providing closed captions today. To turn captioning on, please click on the closed caption icon in your Zoom controls and select Show Subtitle. You can adjust the size for the subtitles. Please use the chat feature. You all know the drill at this point. If you have a comment to share, or if you need help with a technical issue, and please do put your questions for our friends from Sesame Workshop, Rocio and Tara, in the question answer box. And we will try to pause a few times along the way to respond to them. If you would like to receive a certificate of attendance, and we know many of you will, for today's webinar, please be sure you complete the feedback survey. The feedback survey will open in your web browser when our webinar ends today, and you'll also receive a link to this survey tomorrow in our thank you email to you that will include a link to the webinar recording. The survey and webinar recording will be available in both English and Spanish. You can also access the recordings on our YouTube channel and our website, brazeltontouchpoints.org. Before we begin, I want to thank our sponsor, the Burke Foundation, and our soul-nurturing Brazelton Touchpoint Center production team, Isabella Mantilla, Shella Merchant-Juma, Michael Accardi, and Suzanne Okasik. I mean it, people, soul-nurturing. Thank you so much. And now I'm going to introduce today's Learning to Listen guests, Tara Wright and Rocio Galarza. Tara Wright serves as Senior Content Manager in the United States Social Impact Department at Sesame Workshop, which, as you all know, is the nonprofit educational organization behind the beloved children's show, Sesame Street. I think we all have our Sesame Street stories. In her work at Sesame, Tara creates content for sesamestreetincommunities.org and Sesame Street for militaryfamilies.org with the goal to help kids, families, and the providers who work with them grow smarter, stronger, and kinder. Tara is a graduate of the University of Oklahoma, a Marine Corps wife, and a mama to 2 young boys. Maria del Rocio Galarza serves as Vice President of United States Social Impact at Sesame Workshop. Rocio manages the development of educational content for a wide range of multimedia projects. As an expert in early childhood educational development, Rocio works with advisors to ensure that the content of Sesame Street's initiatives is age-appropriate, engaging, and effective. It's so great to have Sesame Workshop back with the Brazelton Touchpoint Center again. Welcome back, Rocio, and thank you so much, Tara and Rocio, for joining us today. I know you've both got some lovely Sesame videos made for children and families resettling in the United States to share with us today. So let's start with you, Rocio. Tell us about what you've got for us.
Well, I thought who better to introduce the foundation for all of our work than Elmo and Alan. And what you're going to see today in this video is resilience, is how we are, the most basic thing that we have is that resilience approach and that basic definition that Alan provides in this video. So let's look and let's see what that is. So it's interesting because that video, when we created the video for resilience, was the idea that that foundation of no matter what happens, we can bounce back. And it's a very specific approach for us because the first thing that we notice in the video is that the most important factor for Elmo to want to keep trying is Alan, is a caring adult in that child's life. And in this particular case, it's not the parent, is, you know, it's one of the wonderful neighbors in Sesame Street. The other thing that we look at when we look at the concept of resilience is that the factors that are inside and outside of me can have an impact on all of us. And that means that there are difficulties that we might go through in life, but they are things that happen to me and they don't have to define me. And it doesn't matter what things are happening. Everyone comes with strengths. Everyone comes with something that they can share, something that they can be proud of, and that they know that will help them bounce back. All of this also means, and the reason why I started with a video that presented something so simple as Elmo trying something and you know, learning that he needs to keep learning, is that resilience also means that these little moments can really add up. These little moments where we have to bounce back and try again, these challenges will actually help us develop this type of skills, the resilience skills that will help us with the bigger challenges, things that your kids cannot control. And so we're assuming that things that parents perhaps didn't think were big moments, those moments where they're hugging their children, where their children are trying something and persisting, and sometimes where the children are learning that they're learning, all of those moments add up to something much bigger when there is a much bigger situation that the family needs to handle together. The other thing that the resilience aspect of, or the approach gives us, is the idea that our brains are malleable. We are not destined to continue in situations that are difficult, right? The situations can change. We can change with them. Sometimes, yes, there are negative outcomes to them, but we don't have to have negative outcomes, which I think is very important for us to realize as human beings while we're going through these situations, because sometimes we do fear the impact of what the situations can bring to our lives without really understanding, look, the impact can actually be positive if we are handling together, we have the support that we need. And then the idea also, of course, that we do bounce back, but when the challenges start getting bigger, we need to bounce back with support. So this approach actually started a long time ago, 15 years ago, and it started with a project that was a little, you know, that I would have never thought that this project would be the one that would set up an approach that will last 15 years and beyond it. And that project was the one for military families. Why? Because military families were going through so many different things, 15 and continue to now, but 15 years ago, it was a lot of deployments, homecomings, grief, changes. And we were developing for them materials that were basically addressing all of these different changes. While we were developing all of this, the families were telling us, look into resilience, because the reason why we're able to go through all of these changes is because we believe that we can develop resilience skills in our children. And so we did. We looked into the resilience research, body of research, and we learned so much from all the factors that again, inside and out, that can affect children. And we also learned that all of these different things that we were, all of these different challenges and even more challenges could be addressed using this approach. And so we went into food insecurity, homelessness, incarceration. We started looking into other difficulties that families were going through beyond military. And what we had learned then was that the experts and the families were telling us, this is very helpful, this is great, but we're going through more than one at a time. And we need your help with understanding what this will do to my brain and to my child's brain. And so from the concept of resilience, we went into understanding what traumatic experiences meant for children and for their families, which was very, very eye-opening for us to think about life not just as these big challenges, but as almost like a flow of big challenges, little challenges. That's life, right? Like we go through different challenges, but also through moments where there are no challenges, like where things are peaceful, and where we can still build resilience by motivating one another and by learning some of the also the joyful moments, what those joyful moments can bring to our family. And so we did explore the concept of trauma, but also of those joyful moments with the families, and what does that mean to create family connections. It was not until um, we got calls from our partners, actually, from that were addressing the border crisis. At that point, there were a lot of kids coming by themselves, and some with families, and this actually kept going on and off for and continues to for many years. And they asked us to help them, that they needed resources because many of the volunteers didn't always have experience with children. They never thought that they would be put in a situation where they would be helping families cope with being at the border. And so we started to ask them, what is it that you're observing? And what was interesting is that no family was alike. Every family coming into this country, whether now through the border or in other ways, they're refugee families, they're all unique and they all have very specific experiences. And yes, some of them, if not, some of those experiences are traumatic, very difficult experiences. But as our resilience approach shows and believes, um, equal to that experience that is traumatic, there are incredible amount of strengths and opportunities for these families to really grow. And so that is what all of our partners were telling us. They did also tell us that kids, particularly those kids when they were in crisis, it was important for us from Sesame perspective to to almost remind them that they were children, and through play they could be reminded that and through perhaps continuing to learn some of the things that they were learning in school, they could continue to be reminded that even though they were going through these sometimes unimaginable challenges, that they still had the capacity to be children, to play. um, and also that everything that they were coming in with should be respected, from language to other experiences, cultural background. At the same time, our partners were telling us we need help giving them some life skill or introduction to what they're about to see and should expect. And so for that, they even told us, can you teach them how to say my name is in English? Something as simple as that could help tremendously. So as we continue to help children in immigration situations, particularly at the border, and learn more about families, I think that all of these concepts of resilience, traumatic experiences really came together to understand children in stress, particularly not only when they were in stress in safe situations, but quite frankly, in situations where their safety was was at stake, right? Where there was a real sense of anxiety because of that. And now we forward to what's been happening of families arriving from Afghanistan. And I would say that it did emphasize even more how all families, even though you think about a group of families coming from one country as they share so much. Yes, they share a lot. They also come with many differences in terms of their experiences and how they handle those experiences. From a company perspective, the first thing that comes that we did, because we do have a program, we had a program in Afghanistan for many years, and it was active. We first had to look at how do we support our own colleagues in their decisions related to their families. And so the very first part of our response was very much in that support. The second part of the response, when we're thinking about this, was what is the risk that we can run into when using the materials that we had created for our Afghanistan project, because of course we didn't want, even though the messaging it really is about children and is ABCs 1, 2, 3s, really. That's what that project really was about. We wanted to make sure that there was no risk associated with the producers, the creatives, all of the wonderful people that had helped us throughout
For
the year.
risk, you mean if the Taliban had found them in possession of those materials? What kinds of risk are you thinking about?
If the material provided a message, perhaps that was not the type of message that they wanted to promote, and they knew, for example, some of the people that had created it. Thankfully, when we looked at the risk assessment, as I'm describing this, there was no risk in these videos, which is a good thing. It's a good thing because it opens up the opportunity for using the videos further in many contexts. So, but you have to think about that. I bring it up because when we are trying to, even here, when you're trying to help families, what you're showing them, you have to think about when there's these type of political changes, big political changes, you also have to think about how families are going to be affected. Another way, and just to clarify, another way, for example, that comes to play is that the immigration project that we did at the border was not something that we publicized. And to this day, I share with you because this is education, right? It's an educational opportunity for all of us to help these families. But we do assess whether or not bringing more media and putting people in the spotlight will actually help them or not. And in a moment of crisis, that is not always helpful, right? What you want is to be able to support the people on the ground that are helping you with the crisis. And so that's why we do make risk assessments before we begin with the resources to know, what is it that is going to be most helpful in these situations. And we did it for Afghanistan, as we did before. And also we reach out to partners. The one thing that we always understand is that it's very hard to get, we're so used to formative research. We're so used to so much research before we start creating resources. When families are in crisis, that's not the moment where you do a focus group with them, obviously, right? So, but the materials need to be informed. We cannot just put out there materials just because we have a knowledge on trauma and resilience without really finding more information. And so the information comes from partners. And the partners are really helping us understand what's going on the ground, but also distilling the messaging so that we're not bombarding families with all sorts of information all at once when that's not what they need. In this particular case for Afghanistan, this initial partner fact-finding process helped us in identifying that when it comes to Afghanistan, there were 3 groups of families. The families that were staying in Afghanistan, that because we still had the program there, we could still be supporting. The families that were moving to other countries, that in some of them, we had co-productions or we had partners that could potentially help, and the ones that were coming here in the United States. And once we had determined all of these group of families, then we had a task force, and the international group handled the international families, and Tara went into the process of how do we serve families that are coming here in the United States. And that's quite frankly has been the process. We have, and it continues to be a process. I think that when we are helping families in crisis, we continue to learn every step of the way. We don't have answers. We have findings for the moment because their lives will continue to change. And so we learn with them as they move from one step or part of the process to another. Josh, you're muted. Go ahead.
Of course. We did have a question about skills for providers.
Mhm.
What kinds of skills do you find are most important for providers who are working with children who are experiencing or have experienced this kind of trauma and stress?
Mhm. Well, for providers, Tara is going to talk a little bit more about the materials, and I know that she has more input, particularly in this one, in this phase for the Afghanistan group, and beyond, because it became something else that she will introduce. But in general, understanding some of the behaviors that they could expect, but also staying flexible of the behaviors that, quite frankly, are unexpected because everyone reacts differently to this traumatic stress, right? We're talking about traumatic experiences, one after another. These are really, really extreme situations for many of these families. And because of that, even when we go into like, oh, bedwetting, when we go into all of the signs of stress for kids, some of the kids are just not going to show all of those signs of stress, going to show something completely different because this is such an extreme situation. Similar to these times, and many of providers, of course, are handling it while the time of crisis is very much happening. One of the things that we had learned, and this not with families that are refugees, but this is a different group, families that are going through community violence and particular episodes of violence in either in their school or something big has happened directly, is that at the very beginning, children and families are a little bit hesitant to share and to talk, not only because of language. I mean, language is yet another thing, but they are hesitant to talk for many other reasons. I mean, they are not feeling safe. And in some cases, they're right not to feel safe, right? Like because their situation will continue to change. And what they found in that particular case for particularly shootings, actually, was that in the moment of crisis, what helped the most was to give a comfort item. And so one of the responses that they provided families was actually giving them blankets, right? And so what is beautiful about what that facilitator was telling us is that the flexibility of how do I do, what do I do when families are reacting differently was the key for her to discover that a blanket was what they needed, right? And so I think that a sense of flexibility, listening, and just observing what the family their behavior might be telling you is the very first step and skill that will help you for families in these very difficult situations.
Thank you so much, Rocio. You've suggested that Tara has more to tell us about that question and so much else. And so we'll go over to you, Tara. And I know you've also got more resources to share with us. And I just wanted to flag for you that there was a question in the chat actually about whether or not you've got resources for families who are fleeing Ukraine, as well as those who have been displaced from Afghanistan. So over to you, Tara. Thank you, Rocio.
Thank you. Yes, absolutely. So I will be touching on how our efforts have evolved from, it started back in the summer, fall last year with the Afghanistan response. But as Rocio mentioned, we're learning all the time. And unfortunately, more of these situations and crises are coming to our attention and at the forefront of people's lives. So we have adapted some of the resources, and those will be coming out soon. So I'll kind of talk about the iteration process there. Um, but one thing I also wanted to just add on to Rocio's question or answer to the previous question about core skills for providers is just that sense of awareness and self-regulation of their own emotions and how you're responding and how you yourself are kind of experiencing what's happening. And I
Yeah,
think that that's a
I love that in that video. In the video we
Mhm.
just saw, you see the adult able to sort of catch the child, both physically and the emotion. So I think we saw one of those skills. So glad you pointed that out, Tara. Thank you.
Yeah, that's one of the things, we touch base with our advisors from a variety of projects, from, trauma to foster care to homelessness, all of these interconnected ACEs or traumatic experiences that, children who are coming from these crisis situations to the US or elsewhere are having really similar emotional experiences, even though we might not label them the same way. And what we hear from advisors all the time is, the emotional regulation of the grown-ups around them is really important to the child's well-being because they're able to model what the child can do in those situations as well. So I think a lot of our resources do a good job of modeling that. The grown-ups on Sesame Street are wonderful. So um, that's another thing I'd add on there. Um, are we ready to get into the specific resources that we've created for this response and our growing response to different crises around the world? I think we can start with a video, just like Rocio did. We're featuring one with Elmo and his father, Louie. Um, this is a really sweet song, and I'm actually going to skip straight to the version in Dari. And this is about this is called Proud Song, and this is you'll see that Elmo's dad sings about all the ways that Elmo makes him feel proud. And like we've been talking about, these moments with caring adults are so important, and even a very small interaction can really add up in a child's life. So the more positive reinforcement they hear, the more encouraging words, even just time spent together quietly with a caring grown-up can really make a difference. So we'll start out with this, and then I will go a little bit more in depth into these resources that we've created.
Right, it's so beautiful. Thank you.
Yeah, I think they did a really lovely job on that one in particular. I think what's really exciting about this work is that we're able to work across departments. So Rocio alluded to, our history of working in the US on the border, but we also have a really vast history of working in refugee settings through our international team. So the resources that we've curated here and pulled together are really a collaboration and a testament to working across teams within Sesame, which is kind of something we don't usually get to do. So it's really exciting and beautiful to see how we can leverage all the resources and all the knowledge to create things that will be really helpful to families. So I just want to run through the sort of topics that we chose for the initial sort of foundation resources for this, what we're calling Welcome Sesame on the US front. There are 6 content themes that we really wanted to focus on. And again, these are pulling from not only the work that we've done around trauma, but also, talking with advisors, talking with partners, including Save the Children, International Rescue Committee, IRC. So, and then advisors from all facets of our response efforts. And also it's also informed by some of our work around, emergency response, which is a big arm of our work in the US as well. So we came up with these 6 content themes, including a welcome from Sesame Street Friends, which is just an introduction to these materials, coping with big changes, and you'll see, I'll show you the resources in a minute, but coping with big changes includes the video we just watched. We've got some content around learning new things, celebrating who we are. So that really speaks to what Rocio was talking about, our strength-based approach, that these families are going through so much, but they have so much to offer and so much strength that they can bring to the table. We have coping with the trauma of resettling, and this has been nuanced a little bit in our iterations for Ukrainian families. So coping with the trauma of crisis, making it a little bit more general and less specific to resettling. And then belonging. So these are messages around there are good things about you. You have so much to offer to your new or your for now community. There are things you can do within your families to show that you belong, even when you might feel out of place in a new place. Do you mind if we just take a look at the website real quick?
Let's go for it.
Okay. All right. So can you all see that? Yes. Okay. So this is what the page looks like right now. And we're actually, because we're always learning, we've already made a change, and we have a name change planned for this page. It's going to be displacement and resettlement, which will really help encapsulate some of our international work a little bit more clearly, because resettlement is a technical sort of legal process here in the US. So this work does, I think, encompass more than just that. So this will be updated to reflect that, and we'll be adding some additional resources and articles to kind of explain the nuances in those types of situations. But here you can see those 6 topics that I mentioned, content themes. And in the English version, the English and Spanish version, they include these resource bundles that you can click through and read. So they each include an introduction, some copy introduction. Then there's a parent or caregiver facing article. This one is about how to talk about change, particularly grief as part of change, because we have learned that one particular thing that these families mostly share is the sense of grief and loss, and how to deal with that. And then, keeping in that Sesame tone, of positivity and a hopeful outlook, that change and big changes and challenges can have positive effects too, if you have the support that you need around you, and really harness the coping skills that you can. And then we've got activities for children and families to do together. So this is what stays the same and what changes, to kind of, again, reiterate that not everything changes. Some things are going to stay the same, namely that you have people who care about you, or that you have intrinsic characteristics within you that can make you feel comfortable and calm and confident. So this is the English version, English and Spanish. And I think what's really exciting, again, is that, we were able to work across departments and modify and adapt and really curate resources to enhance these topics. So on the resources in Dari page and a resources in Pashto page that we'll also have, we have even more content that really complements the themes that we've outlined. So we've got a handful of storybooks that are going to be available. And we have more videos for each bundle. So if we go to that same bundle, you'll see this is actually a button, and I'll show you what the parent pages look like. But there are more videos for each topic, which is exciting, and those are all dubbed into the language. And then we also have an interactive on some of these, so they can play a game and kind of practice the strategy that they're learning. One of the technical challenges of this work was the language translation. Our website just simply couldn't host it, so we had to be flexible. And this is actually, it correlates to some of the feedback we got from partners. So particularly with the Afghanistan response, when we were initially starting out, we were working very closely with US military bases, and we learned that they didn't actually have access to video or internet. Their access was very low, so they needed more print resources, which correlated to what our international partners were saying about their response efforts, that they would need a low tech option for these resources. So that kind of worked in our favor because we weren't able to host this language on our website anyway. So we needed to make a PDF version of basically all the resources. So that's what we did. And I can show you. So instead of, you know, just text on the screen, we've actually created what we're calling parent packets. And these are great for any caring person, adult that's with a child. And it's got all the same text, similar text, some nuance to the English version. And it's got descriptions of the videos. It's got descriptions of the interactives, but it's basically the articles translated into the language, the printables translated into the language. So these are able to be printed and used both in temporary housing situations by providers in the States, but also internationally, you know, in refugee or resettlement spaces there. So that is kind of how we've adapted the resources to be able to work in multiple settings and to be able to host them on our site. So this button should click out, right? Yes, to the page. So that's what parents can access. And quite recently, we've heard of some just literacy issues or accommodating different levels of literacy that we hadn't really thought of, surprisingly. So we're also looking into what an audio option would be to try to make these materials as accessible as possible. So that is kind of a look at the resources as they are now. And I know we had a question about resources in Ukrainian, and we are developing those as well. So these resources in Dari and Pashto should be available by the end of May. And we have been working very quickly, rapidly to reversion some of these things into Ukrainian. I think Russian will also come at a later time. And so those will be available soon. Again, the videos for each language are slightly different because we had some different considerations that we needed to keep in mind, just like Rocio mentioned earlier. For instance, the Proud song that we just watched in Dari, we actually did not include in the Ukrainian version because we know that the men in the community are not allowed to leave. And so many of these families are coming without father figures, and we didn't want to be overly, you know, we didn't want to add to any pain as much as possible. So we kind of limited our use of Louis and Elmo together. We kind of complemented the resources with different assets that could get the same strategies across, but be a little bit more delicate in that respect.
Yeah, there are, in the men in Ukraine are not allowed to leave the country if they're between the ages of, I think, 16 or 18 and 60 or 65 or something. Right. So there are many other questions about access, which you just began to address. So one was, yes, I'm originally from Ukraine. I brought my 6-year-old granddaughter from Ukraine a couple of weeks ago. Something for Ukrainian families or only for Afghanistan. I think you've addressed that. Bilingual resources in different dialects like Pashto. I think you've addressed that. When will the Dari resources be available? And what about other languages? Someone was asking about Haitian Creole, and then someone asked about video versions in sign language. or opportunities for interpretation for children. So lots more questions about accessibility, and then a couple of questions about your experience so far. One is about to what extent you've encountered mothers in Afghanistan who aren't able to read, and then a more general question about what has surprised you most about resilience in families who are resettling in the US. So I'll let you start with more on access, language, signing, and then about reading capacity and how you handle that, and then your surprises as you're doing this learning yourself.
Sure. So the resources in Dari and Pashto, and I believe Ukrainian, should be available by the 25th of May. That is our aiming for date. It has been a journey full of ups and downs and many challenges. We do try to use local talent and things like that. So, you know, depending on their safety and things like that, that also affects the timing. But by the end of May, those should be available, and you will be able to access them on sesamestreetandcommunities.org. On that resettlement page, there will be subtopics: resources in Dari, resources in Pashto, resources in Ukrainian. So that's how you will be able to access them. I encourage you to bookmark the page now. And if you'd like to be on our mailing list for that, you can get in touch with us or leave your email, and we will be sure to let you know ASAP when those are launched. And then as far as sign language, I'm going to toss that to Rocio because that's fascinating. And
we've got Swahili and Haitian Creole and Farsi.
Yes, no, and
this is a wonderful country where we've got all of the richness of all these languages and cultures.
yes, and we do receive a lot of requests for many different languages. And what we're hoping is that this Welcome Sesame page will continue to grow. And we're looking into how partners that are interested in some of these languages, sometimes they translate it themselves and because they need to for their work. And so we're looking at how do we start using some of those same translations and work that is already being done on the ground and start adding to the pages and create more pages for different languages. But like Tara mentioned, it does take time, and it takes it takes a lot of people working together. And I'm glad that she mentioned the international co-productions, because international teams, because without their expertise on refugees, without their expertise on some of these particular languages, it would be very, very hard to do this work. And so that's another thing that's why we are relying, we hope to rely more on partners, because we don't have expertise in some of the other languages that are needed. And so we have to build that cadre of experts and translators, and versioning things requires also some cultural sensitivity, understanding early childhood. It's very complicated. So we're trying to continue to grow this, but it will take time.
And someone else asked about whether or not these resources are free. So I wanted to be sure you could address that before the question about mothers in Afghanistan and whether you run into many who aren't able to read, and then the question about what surprised you when you look at resilience in families who are resettling. And then I have this question about all these different languages, but we know language is culture, and it's not just a matter of translating.
Yeah.
So there's a bunch of questions there.
Yes. I mean, I'll address that, and I should have mentioned that in sort of our process for how we develop. Not only do we speak with partners and on the ground people who are working with these families, but we also have a cultural advisor who reviews the English, and that has been a learning process, because we just don't know what we don't know, and we don't know our own limitations sometimes, and so we do have cultural advisors who weigh in. We try to get people who are not only familiar with the culture, but also familiar with the crisis or the trauma, but not too close to the crisis. And then people who have an understanding of child development and what's appropriate for families, and how to talk about these very difficult things in a child appropriate way. So that is a big thing, and it's not just language. And we've encountered that, I think, especially with the Ukrainian response, because the parenting styles are different, and the way that we talk about trauma, or the way that we talk about feelings or don't talk about feelings in different cultures, can come up. So that has been really fascinating. And as this work continues to grow, I think it's going to inform, the rest of our work, and how we are more inclusive than even we are trying to be at this point. I forgot your second question, Joshua.
Oh, is it free? Are these resources
Oh,
free?
yes, they
Yes,
are
yes,
free.
Yeah, that was
100%,
easy.
yes.
And
Yes.
and then there was a question about women in Afghanistan who once again are being deprived of schooling, and whether or not you've dealt with the challenges of limited reading abilities.
Yeah, so that's something we're looking into right now. It just recently got brought up to us, and I don't know honestly how we missed it in the, in the first place, but we're looking into how to make some of these resources available via audio, maybe podcasts, things like that, from the website, or have links that providers might be able to share directly with parents through text messages or something like that. So we're exploring that. And if you all have ideas, we're definitely open to that as well.
I love the way you're always learning. So the one other question was about what has surprised you most when you're witnessing resilience in families who are resettling here, which is a beautiful question.
No.
First.
Well, that one is so
Hard.
it's hard without getting emotional, right? And it's not a skill, it's not something perhaps that can be researched, but the power of the human spirit is pretty remarkable. It's incredible. And how much we rely on one another, how families are helping. Some of these families are helping children that are not part of that were not part of their family. Some of those families are welcoming help from people that they've never thought in their lives they would meet and would help them. And they are, I mean, resourceful doesn't even begin to describe it. It is something else. It is like a life force, is wanting to see hope and experience hope in a way that is very, very unique. So I think that that's something that is really beautiful to see and to hear from the experiences. But I remember though, Tara, that you were also talking to me at one point about not only the families that were going through this, but also the volunteer families.
Yeah, that's one thing that has really struck me through this whole process of learning. And I haven't had a direct encounter just yet. I know there are families in my community that have been resettled here, and I hope to help. But I have heard of people who are helping, and I'm just astonished at, well, first off, the families who are coming here have so much to learn. You just really underestimate all the things that are going to be so different culturally, just the clothes, the weather, the grocery store, just the basic things that life as they knew it is just going to be so different here. And how much we truly can help in very little ways. um, you know One of our advisors said, as much as you can, encourage people, whether that's a volunteer or providers like yourselves, if you're educators, encourage those caring providers or people who are helping these families to, make as much room as possible for the parents or the caregivers to just be with their kids. Um, I'm a mom of two littles. I have one on the way, and I know it's just hard to get things done sometimes. And I can't imagine having the level of trauma, level of stress, anxiety of finding a job, finding a home, all the just newness of this life. And then, wanting to spend quality time with my children on top of that. So one thing that an advisor told us is, as much as you can, encourage people who are in their circle of care to allow them to have that time together, because, we started out with Alan and Elmo. Those interactions between a caring adult and a child can just make such a big difference. And so allowing time for parents to just be parents in the midst of all this, I think is really crucial. And that's something that, you just have to sit with it. And it surprised me how much I took for granted about what these families were really going through, and the level of complexity of the challenges they're facing. So
And you
that
know
surprised
what you're
me.
saying is really interesting too, because sometimes we think about how do I help them emotionally? How do I talk to them? And what you're describing is, do the groceries for them so they can spend time with their kids,
Yeah.
right? It's like some of the more basic things, or teach them how to navigate how to navigate the school system or something like that, so that everything else when it comes to their family life is easier. And that is, that's something that we can describe in a resource, but it is something that the doing is what makes such a huge difference in the families.
Yeah,
Is it
and
very
it's a
important?
challenge. Yeah.
Mhm.
We just have a few minutes left, and I'm wondering if there um, are some final resources or some final thoughts that you'd like to share with us to send us on our way.
Well, we were going to share our professional development resources, so I'll just put a plug in for that. If you go to sesamestreetandcommunities.org, there's a professional development portal on the site, and there are interactive courses and webinars and some training videos that can support a lot of the resilience that we have talked about today for different types of providers. And we're also developing some mini courses that will support work with resettling families or displaced families, or just families in general who have gone through some crisis. So those will be coming I'm gonna put dates on it, fall, spring next year.
And we've got in the chat, the links to the resources that for professionals that you've already got ready for us. So take a look at the chat for that link.
Great. So I'll just put a plug in for that, and then Rocio, feel free.
No, I agree that the resources for professional development are very useful, and they will continue to grow. So yes, the mini course is coming sometime in the fall. But in the meantime, there is a wonderful webinar with Ann Thomas from the Children's Place describing traumatic experiences. There is an entire set of resources around resilience. So there's a lot of resources there. And the last thing that I wanted to say is that, as we have said, and we hinted as well throughout the presentation, that we need a lot of caring adults in order to help these families. And the fact that you're here and that you're one of those caring adults is very important. So thank you for being there for them, and know that it doesn't matter in that moment. It might not seem like you're doing that much at times, or sometimes it feels like, oh, do they think this is helpful? It doesn't matter. I just know that it is. Know that it is helpful, and that you're changing someone's life by being there for them. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rocio and Tara and Sesame Workshop, for the wonderful work you do, and for sharing it with us, and for all of the ways that you bring hope to so many children and families around the world, and the ways you keep the light shining for all of us. It's always so good to have you with us. And we hope you'll come back again for another Learning to Listen conversation to share with us what you're up to next, because it sounds like you're up to a lot. So please come back, and we'll see you all again soon. Thank you. Now, before you all sign off, I just want to tell you what we've got coming up. Join us for our last Parenting While Black series conversation on Monday, May 16th. And for our LGBTQIA2+ families, then and now series, which continues on April 25th and every other Monday through June 20th. We've also got our strengths-based family engagement workshop series, which starts on June 1, which is sooner than we all want to think. And our development is a journey workshop comes back on June 23rd. And then touch points for developmental challenges starts July 1. So please do come back and visit with us again. Thank you all for being with us today and for all you do for children and families in this country and around the world.